Hello and welcome back to another Tea Time with me, Amanda Prochaska. Today we have a new mug. By the way, Alice in Wonderland, awesome. But today we are going to be going through procurement as a service, which is an interesting concept that came about, I don't know, maybe about 2 years ago. I started hearing more and more people considering procurement as a service. And what we're going to be talking about today is what that is and the 6 reasons that it might be really great for you and 6 reasons why it might not be great for you. So we'll talk about pros and cons here over the next, 15 minutes. So grab your drink of choice and let's get started. All right. My daughter found this for me. I love it to death. So hopefully you're enjoying your drink of choice. So what is procurement as a service? So you might be thinking to yourself, well, procurement is really already a service, but the way that most organizations are structured, you have a team of people that are hired internally into your company, and then you go out and you develop your own processes, you invest in your own technology stack, and that procurement organization becomes part of the day-to-day of the organization. And you pay for that by the headcount and the technology that you buy, usually as a fixed cost. So that is traditionally what we see today. There has been a movement to more of a procurement as a service, although I have not seen it take like a really strong hold, but it might be an interesting concept for you to consider. So procurement as a service, think about it as like BPO. So traditional, we're going to outsource our procurement aspects of our procurement, all of our procurement to a third party. But where it's different is that then you also, as part of that subscription that you're paying for, the service provider is selecting the technology stack that you are using. The service provider is also doing the data analytics for you. So think about it as I no longer have to select my tech stack and implement that myself. The third party that is also doing aspects of the day-to-day of procurement is now going to be providing that to us as part of the subscription model. Okay, so that is what we're talking about here. How much of that should you be looking at a service provider to help you do? Now, people might be thinking, like when I first heard this concept, I was like, there's no way. Like, there's just no way that this is going to work. I started thinking about all the negative stuff, but there could be reasons why you might want to consider a procurement as a service. So let's go through the pros of this first. I actually have 6 different pros and 6 different cons to consider. And then it's really up to you as the leader of an organization in procurement or even beyond, if you are over like in finance, etc. This might be an interesting concept for you to consider. So let's go ahead and get to our first pro. Now, lots of organizations are looking at their overall P&Ls, their costs, their SG&A that they're carrying on their books each and every year. The pro of a procurement as a service provider is that you would reduce your fixed costs as an organization. So there is a kind of financial play here. It goes from a fixed cost to a variable cost. Those variable costs can go up and down depending on how much you're using this particular organization. So if you have a very volatile procurement process or procurement need demand, so sometimes you have an extreme amount of volume coming through and other times you have very little, this might be a really good option for you. Okay, so, and if you're looking at maybe reducing some costs, this would be an option. Now, I already mentioned flex up and flex down. Not only from a financial standpoint, but availability of resources standpoint it's really an interesting concept to say, okay, how can I leverage a third party to flex up and flex down as my needs change. Either you're a seasonal build business, or you have, I know in some mining companies right now, they just grow like extremely fast, and then the market changes, and then they slow way down, and then they go way back up again. It depends on your business, but if you are in that volatile state where it's really going crazy, flexing up and down, this might be an option for you. Okay. Tech landscape is changing quite a bit, and this is number 3. Those landscapes are changing quite often, and so for some organizations to keep up with all of the change, it's very difficult because you have to go in and you have to, pitch it, you have to get the resources, you have to get the funding, you have to go through the implementation yourself, and it just is a bit. It takes maybe a long time, but it also is challenging internally to get those funds available to you. And because the tech is changing so rapidly, we're going to be shifting likely away from subscription models of like SaaS platforms, if you will, to a lot more AI bots. As that shift is happening, it might also be very hard for you to keep pace of how to go about doing that internally. So these service providers are accountable for keeping the best technology up to date in your organization. Now, obviously you need to select the right provider to be able to do that, and you have confidence that they're going to keep up to speed on all of the technology advancements, but that is part of the reason why you would go to a procurement as a service provider, to make sure that you are always up to date from a technology standpoint. Okay, so number 4 is speed to market or rapidly changing market conditions. So these service providers are not only providing you, but they're providing services to several other customers who might or might not be in the same industry, but the service providers need to be able to keep up with rapidly changing market conditions. So as they're learning about a market condition with one customer, they could also apply it to your account and other customers along the way. So they've aggregated their knowledge so that they can really adapt more quickly to those changing conditions. I know right now, as I'm recording the video, we're talking a lot in the United States about tariffs. That is a macroeconomic change, massively impacts procurement organizations. And so if you're providing services to a lot of different businesses in the United States, that service provider will have ideas and best practices already around how to approach that marketplace versus you trying to do it internally yourself. Okay, so number 5, and this is how you might use one of these providers, but you don't think about this as I'm going to shift everything out, which you can do. I'm not saying that you can't, but you could also think about this as what parts of a procurement organization am I going to shift to procurement as a service. So for instance, a lot of people start with their transactional side of the business because that's where it's heavy in technology too. So you can gain some of these pros by just taking a portion of your organization and moving it out. So again, kind of similar to BPO, only now you're also leveraging their tech versus your own. So a big pro of that is that you don't have to lift and shift everything out all at once. You can get the benefits from a procurement as a service provider, doing the transactional, and then it keeps your internal team isolated to just doing what's truly strategic for your organization. So if you're trying to make that shift into strategic procurement, proactive procurement, it might be a good option to look at procurement as a service for the transactional side, so you can really keep your focus where it needs to be on the strategic side. Okay, and the last one is number 6, and that is access to more competency. So if you are struggling to find the right people for roles, if you are maybe going into a new market area and you don't have competency for that type of purchase, there might be benefits if you're doing that on a regular basis, or you have that regular struggle. It might be interesting to look at procurement as a service, because you're going to have more access to that competency from the service provider versus trying to source it on your own. So that is another consideration, another really large pro around going with this type of model, is access to knowledge across the board. So let me wrap up. I'm going to go quickly through all 6 of these as a summary. So pro number 1, reduce your fixed costs. Pro number 2, flex up and flex down as needed. Number 3, rapid adoption of technology. Number 4, speed to market and market changes. Number 5, you can shift to strategic more easily if you leverage this for your transactional process. And number 6, access to more competency. So those are your pros related to this model. Now, let's get to the cons. And I told you at the beginning, this is where my head originally went at when I heard of this model. I am shifting a little bit to being more supportive of this as a potential solution for certain organizations. So let's go through the cons. Things to consider as you are looking at a procurement as a service provider. Lack of customization. So if you have processes, if you have different customization in your tech stack, when you go to a service like this, everything is pretty standard. So that might actually be a pro for you because you need to get to standard and you need to move away from your customization. But if you have a lot of unique processes, that might not be an option for you. So keep that in mind. It's a large shift in mindset too. If you are highly customized today and you go to a service provider like this, you might be losing out on some of what you think is important. So lack of customization is number 1. Number 2, lack of control over the process. So again, this is kind of like customization. Customization is usually more on the tech side. Lack of control over process is if you have a particular need from a process standpoint that is unique or maybe not best practice, but you think it's a requirement for your particular business. When you shift to a model like this, they are going to take you to the standard process. So I know one of my customers, they had all kinds of different approvals. And when I first started with them, I was like, why would you ever do that? But once I got to know their business, I was like, okay, yeah, I understand why they have all of this nuanced approval process. So there could be, you would want to do an analysis around what their standard is from a process standpoint, what yours are today, and whatever gaps you might have. And then strategically think about, are those solvable in a different way, or are we just going to go into this knowing that there's gaps, or maybe determine that this is not a right fit for you. Okay, so number 3, cultural fit. So when you move to a provider like this and you're analyzing who to select, it's very important to understand if they are going to be a really great cultural fit for you. Not only from a relationship standpoint, like you as managing this piece of the business with that provider, do you have a really trusting relationship? Can you rely on them to continue to grow? Can they rely on you to do the same? Like, you need to make sure that there's a fit there. But from a day-to-day standpoint, these folks within the service model are going to be working either with your teams or with your end users, your stakeholders, etc. So you need to make sure that the day-to-day contact also meets your cultural needs and that people can adapt quickly enough to the changes that this service provider might be bringing to you. And this is where actually I had the most concern about this model, is that if the service provider is changing something and changing a process, changing a technology, changing maybe a measurement of what success looks like, how easily is your organization going to adopt those changes? That is something that, especially if they're doing it at a rapid pace, something to keep in mind culturally within your organization is if you are going to be adaptable to all of those changes along the way. Okay, number for long-term costs. Okay, so we talked about cost reduction in the short term, shifting from your fixed cost to variable costs, but now you're in a subscription model, and that subscription model could increase at a more rapid pace than what you were thinking, or it could just longer term, you're locked into a subscription over time. So longer term, you might want to do an analysis around, okay, well, the fixed cost reduction short term is great, but what do we look at from a long-term standpoint, and how do we control those costs moving forward? There's all kinds of things you can do in a negotiation standpoint, but let's just say that they, get an extra technology and want to increase your subscription costs. How do you manage that situation to make sure that your longer term costs don't outweigh the shorter term gain that you had from your fixed costs? Okay, number 5, you are going to be in a sole sourced relationship. So we talk about sole source a lot when it comes to direct procurement and maybe even some indirect categories, but think about you're going to be moving a good portion of your procurement to a provider. What happens if that provider has an outage? What happens if that provider no longer can come into the office? What happens if that provider has financial issues along the way, or just decides that they're no longer going to be providing this service? So those are all considerations as you go into an engagement like this to make sure that you have either alternative options available or you have a business continuity plan to be able to either bring that back in-house or function in a different way as needed. So again, just like you would manage any other sole source provider, you want to make sure that you have those plans in place. And then the last one is quality. Now, you could have quality issues whether you move it to a service provider or not. You could have those challenges today, but quality becomes such a bigger issue when you do have a third party involved. Being able to measure the quality, being able to remedy quality issues. Let's just say the service provider selects a technology that's not really working very well. Well, now you have to work through that service provider who's then working with the technology provider to get that fixed. So there might be more challenges from a quality standpoint than what you face today in the aspect of being able to resolve those issues. You have a lot more parties involved when you go through a service provider, and you might not have all of the control that you have today to resolve those issues. So that is a big consideration as you're looking at a possible service provider here. So those are your 6 cons. Now, on the pros and the cons, there might be more than what I covered today, but hopefully this gives you a very good starting point. So just to run down the 6 cons: lack of customization, reduced control over processes. Your cultural fit and change adoption is number 3. Long-term costs, keeping those in control, number 4. A sole source provider, number 5. And resolution of quality issues, number 6. And those are your 6 cons to procurement as a service. So hopefully this was a really great video for you to review today. I am Amanda Prochaska. I'm the founder and chief Wonder officer of Wonder Services. We are here to help procurement leaders really excel in whatever change they are trying to bring forward into the organization. So whether it's a change related to what we're talking about here, or if you're going through a merger and acquisition, an organizational change, technology deployment yourself, we are here to help you through that change and hopefully gain the adoption that you're looking for. So I am thrilled that you watched today. If you liked it, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on another video. And cheers until next time.